This is perhaps just a comment. In verse 23, Yeshua is saying, you neglected the weightier matters of the Torah, the right ruling and the compassion and the belief. When I first read that the Torah is about belief, that was a big thing.
Amen. So what he's saying is to understand that the instructions that come from the Almighty, okay, and actually everything in this book that we call the Scriptures is the story of the battle between fear and doubt and belief, trust and belief. And in the Hebrew, it would be the word emunah. Emunah means belief, but it's not belief like Christianity teaches belief. It's a complete and thorough confidence down to your bones that everything is in the hands and the control of the Almighty, which means He allows or causes everything. That doesn't mean that you have nothing to say and nothing to do. It just means that whatever happens, He's going to, if He allows it to happen, He's going to use it to complete the purpose that He has planned. He's in control. And so that's why we then, when things do happen, and sometimes bad things happen, and some terrible things happen, we say, okay, He allowed that to happen. We may not understand why He allowed it to happen. Of course, if we get foolish, we can, if it's something bad and happen, we can get mad at Him and blame Him, and then we lash out at Him because we'll say, He caused it to happen. Well, maybe He didn't cause it to happen, but He allowed it to happen. And so, if you are coming from a place of emunah, you trust that there's a purpose that serves His purposes in allowing it to happen. No matter what happens and how much it doesn't make sense to you and you can't really see it, you trust it anyway. Amen?
Rabbi, would you mind clarifying, a lot of times when we keep, if people are doing Purim or they're doing Hanukkah or whatever, they're not actually commanded feasts. So those that are not keeping the feasts of Yahweh will come back at you and say, well, those are feasts that are not in the Scriptures, so what's the difference between that and keeping Easter and Christmas or other holidays that are not quite so opposing to or traditions? Basically, they'll say that those are traditions that we have. What's the difference? Would you mind clarifying what makes that tradition so opposing to what Scripture says?
Okay, I do mind. Okay, next question. No. He said, if you don't mind, and then he said so much more, I wasn't even going to make the joke, but then he said it again. Well, so if you don't mind. Okay, so look, there is a lot of backlash that people go through, when they start to realize that things that they've been always taught was wrong. And so that anger, it's almost like the person that becomes like a reformed smoker and starts smacking cigarettes out of people's mouths and stuff, They become the ugly reformed person. A lot of you have done that. You become that ugly reformed person, reformed Christian. I'm not a Christian anymore from the point of view of Christmas and Sunday and Easter, so I'm going to go bash everybody in anything they do that even looks like tradition or whatever it is. Okay, so let's understand that when we're talking about Christmas and Easter, they have very specific origins that you can look up and find and understand the pagan origins of these things. Okay, there's no way that you can figure out from Scripture that there's any reference to an egg-laying rabbit. And what in the world does it have to do with the resurrection of Yeshua or any of those things? And so the Easter thing is right there in the name. It's Ishtar. And there's a connection, by the way, to egg-laying rabbits, to Ishtar. And so you can find these things out. It was a fertility stuff, and it was a springtime thing, so it matched up time-wise with the Passover and unleavened bread time, when Yeshua was killed and resurrected. You could do the same thing with the Saturnalia and the Christmas time. And there was, from the Christmas time to what would be New Year's, which was basically from the equinox to, the winter solstice to the quote-unquote the New Year that they were doing. That's where you get the 12 days of Christmas from. Okay? So you get that kind of thing going on. Then you say, okay, but what about Hanukkah and what about Purim? Well, Purim actually is in my book. So I don't know why they have a problem with that. It's not in Leviticus 23, which is the listing of the feast days, and you don't have to do it. You can choose to join yourself with the Jewish brothers who imposed on themselves a celebration. And that's what it says in the book of Esther. They imposed this on themselves. Just like in this country, we have 4th of July, and we have Thanksgiving, we have other national things, and every country has national things. And those are traditions that people observe or don't observe that are just part of the national culture. And so we see at the end of the book of Esther, it says that they imposed this on themselves and all those that would attach themselves to them. So we can see by extension that when it talks about us being grafted in Romans 11 to the root, and the root being the Jews who are still the visible part of the root, Israel being the root, but the Jews being a part of that, well, then we are essentially grafting ourselves into that. And so you can see where you can be considering that this is an imposition that has been put that's also for you. And so just to read you the verse, if I could find it real quickly here. In verse 27 of Esther chapter 9, Esther 9:20, the Yehudim established and imposed it upon themselves. So they make it very clear that this is not Yahweh's feast. They didn't impose this thing. It said, and upon their seed and all that who should join them, that they would that without fail they would observe these 2 days every year. Okay, so, and they call these days Purim, for the casting of the lots, to select the day. Okay, tradition. Now, celebrating it is a biblically referenced tradition that is a good thing to do. Turning it into an alternative Halloween is not. Now, I do blame the Jewish community for allowing that to happen. It started off with traditions of dressing up like the characters in the story, because the tradition is to read the book of Esther, the Megillah, the Megillot Esther, which means the scroll of Esther, on Purim, to recount the story. And then it turned into a tradition where the children would dress up like Haman and Mordechai and Esther and Vashti and Achashverosh. And then it turned into the competition with Halloween where people dressed up as anything. We do not need to take that tradition and turn it into what it's turned into. That's not what it originally was. We can understand. Now you have the same problem with Hanukkah. Okay, Hanukkah, we see referenced also in the scriptures. Okay, see if I can find it real quick. In John 10, by the way, if you want this job, you have to know where everything is and be able to find it quickly. Okay, in John 10 and verse 22, it says, and at the time of Hanukkah Yeshua came to be in Jerusalem, and it was winter. And he was walking on in the set apart place on the porch of Shlomo, on Solomon's porch. So here it's being referenced as a positive thing, and Yeshua was there in the set apart place, because see, Hanukkah in its original, before the 1960s here in the States, where it was turned into the alternative Christmas, where they were giving presents every day for the 8 days, because the Jews the American Jews, especially in New York, wanted to outdo the Christians, say, oh, you give all those presents on one day for Christmas? We're giving our kids them 8 days. And those kids went to school going, you got 1 day? I got it all week. That tradition started only in the last 50 years. It's not that old a tradition. The tradition, though, of recognizing and observing a time called Hanukkah goes back all the way to the rededication of the temple after it was destroyed. Not the temple destruction in 70, but the earlier one. When they came in and they set up, Antiochus Epiphanes set up the abomination of desolation in the holy place and put the statue of Jupiter, in the holy place. And so what happened, and what we understand, as opposed to the tradition about the burning of the oil for 8 days, what happened was the Feast of Tabernacles, Sukkot, is 8 days. And they wanted to clean that temple out and have it ready for Sukkot. And they couldn't get it done. They also knew they couldn't move Sukkot, because they already knew about what happened with Jeroboam and Rehoboam, and how Jeroboam changed the feast and moved it a month later. So they didn't want to do that either. So what they did was they decided to have their own separate festival, a tradition, a community thing where they did for 8 days, they celebrated the rededicating of the temple. How light, the Ner Tamid, the eternal flame, was put back on and burning, which is where you get the story about the miracle of the oil. How they only had enough for 1 day, but it lasted for the whole 8 days. Because there is this one thing that's supposed to be on and lit. If you read in the instructions of the Kohanim, of the priests, they were supposed to have a duty to make sure that fire is always burning. And that's why it's called the Festival of Light, because the light was turned back on in the temple. It was cleaned out and it was relit. So that's why it's 8 days, because Sukkot is 7 days plus the Shemini Atzeret, the 8th day festival. So you cannot compare, and people will try to do this, you cannot compare these things in their reality. You can't compare them in the way most people do them. Most people do Hanukkah and Purim just like Christmas and Halloween. So in that case, you can't blame them for saying, oh, what's the difference? Look at what you do. Well, you know what? Don't do it that way, and they don't have an argument. You don't have to do either of them anyway. They're self-imposed national celebrations. But you say, but Yahweh didn't give you those. No, he didn't. In Leviticus 23, these are the feasts of Yahweh. These are the appointed times of Yahweh. And it's not in there, Hanukkah, and it's not in there, Purim. Okay, I understand that. But you know what? There's a chapter, and this one I'm not going to be able to find real quickly off the top of my head, but there's a chapter where it talks about the fast of this month and that month and this month, and there's like four fasts that are mentioned. Only one of them is Yom Kippur, the fast of the 7th month. The other ones are self-imposed national fasts that are connected to, believe it or not, the destruction of that temple. Because there were fastings that were done when they knew that the temple, or I should say Jerusalem, was under siege. And there's the fast of Gedaliah. I can never pronounce the name. Okay? There's 3 other fasts that are recognized in these other months that have to do with when they were under siege, when the temple actually got destroyed, etc. These are national fasts that Yahweh recognizes and acknowledges as legitimate. It's written in one of the prophets. Because there are no fasts commanded anywhere in Scripture except the one for Day of Atonement, for Yom Kippur. So that hopefully is a long-winded way of answering their question, okay? He does allow for national celebrations. You know, we have other celebrations. You have Holocaust Memorial Day, which is an Israel celebration that some of us actually participate in and recognize that there's a memorial to the horrors of the Holocaust. Okay? And so there are all kinds of national occurrences. You know, we recognize and acknowledge events that are memorialized by celebrations of some sort. You know, most of us look forward to, Memorial Day because it's a long weekend. It means the summer's coming soon. But no, it's a tribute to those who gave their lives in service to the country. And so you can choose to participate that or not. But it's not a religious function. Okay? So let's just bear in mind that man has done a terrible job of taking something that was okay and making it a mess. We all should know that. We're good at that as human beings, aren't we?
You were talking about like traditions and things like that, and in some circles, especially in like the Christian community, there's this huge anti-Semitism that we see, and like this, you hear it talked about like, oh, you don't want to be like the Pharisees, and they'll use that to mean like just don't even be at all like the Jews, right? And they just take that and lump it all together. And I just wanted to point back to, like in verse 23, he doesn't necessarily say what they were doing is always wrong unless it was contradicting Torah, but more that it's the hypocrisy of that. So it's not necessarily these things we're doing that outwardly, yes, we might look really similar to like the Jewish community, but are we doing this in sincerity and not in hypocrisy? As you get accused of being you're like a Pharisee wearing those seats or whatever. Like, just reminding that's not what it's about. It's about, are we doing this in sincerity and not hypocrisy? Okay,
let me kind of repackage that a little bit. there are all of you have probably seen this happen. There's a lot of people out there that will say, as soon as you want to keep the commandments, especially if you want to be pretty disciplined about it, oh, you're turning into a Pharisee. Nowhere does Yeshua attack the Pharisees for keeping the Torah. He has a problem with them teaching and not keeping it. He has a problem with them in a hypocritical way keeping it. He has no problem with them keeping it. And so that's where we run into the problem. Matthew 23 starts off and says, when they're sitting in Moses' seat teaching Moses, do what they say. Well, what is Moses? It's the Torah, it's the teachings, the laws. You see, but all of a sudden the anti-Semitism, as you pointed out, will come out. And so then all of a sudden now we have to deal with that they're equating Pharisee with Torah observance. And so, oh, you're a Pharisee now, you're wearing tzitzit. No, I'm an Israelite, I'm wearing tzitzit. I'm Torah observant, which is the covenant. By the way, ask them, are you in covenant? Oh, I'm in covenant. As a matter of fact, my church is probably called Covenant such and such covenant, whatever. All these churches with covenant in it. You can't be in covenant if you're breaking the law. That is the covenant. Oh, but we're in the new covenant. It's a renewing of the old covenant, the one they screwed up. Now you get a chance to do it right. We don't have a new, okay, you guys were so bad at this, let me make it easier for you. Just believe in Messiah and you're in. Well, why didn't he do that in the first place? That was what he was wanting to do, make it easy. He said, look, if you can show me that you trust me enough to obey what comes out of my mouth, I will take you as my people. That's the covenant. Exodus 19, verse 5 and 6, that's your covenant. Moses, go tell the people, if they're going to be willing to trust me and do what comes out of my mouth, I will take them as my people. One of the things that came out of his mouth was to keep the Sabbath. One of the things that came out of his mouth was to wear tzitzit. One of the things that came out of his mouth, by the way, and the tzitzit are to remind you to do the things that came out of his mouth. I tell everybody, it's the original string around the finger. Like, you know how the people have the tradition of wearing a string on the finger to remind them to do something? Then you forget why you put the string on. That's what that's for. At least these strings that are on your clothing, you know what they're for. It's only for one thing. You don't have different strings to remind you of different things. These strings to remind you to do what came out of his mouth, to obey. And why do we obey? Because he also told us if you obey, you will be blessed. If you obey, you will be safe. If you obey, you'll be changed from what you are into what I am. He says, so obey. Oh no, that's that horrible, awful law that we don't want to do that. Oh no. Well, I don't know. I read the book and it says, obedience brings blessing. I read the book and obedience brings safety and protection. And I read the book and it seems to me that if we're going to be transformed and conformed to the image of the Son was obedient unto death. It says he was obedient unto death. So if I want to be like him, I got to be obedient unto death. Even death at the stake is what it says. But see, it's true what Josh said though. There is rampant, even subtle anti-Semitism out there. And it comes out when it's faced with what looks Jewish to them. But it doesn't say this is the feast of the Jews, or the kosher laws of the Jews, or the wearing tzitzit of the Jews. All this stuff was given to all of Israel at Sinai. It wasn't given to, the Jews were 1/12 of all that. Actually a little bigger, there was a little bit more of them than everybody else, but just a little bit. A few thousand more than when they add up all the numbers. There was 600,000, 603,800 or something like that. And 70-something thousand was the Jews. Okay, so they represented almost over 10%. But still, that's only 10%. The other 90% weren't Jews. But inside, there's this generational anti-Semitism. That's why we've all end up hearing this horrible wording and the facial expression where, oh, what are you, a Jew now? Anybody heard that? What are you trying to be, a Jew? I always answer, born that way, sorry. I was already a Jew. Not trying to do anything. Come by it naturally. But I'm trying actually to be a better Jew, being born a Jew, because I was born in a very secular Jewish community with a lot of people that weren't actually doing anything. So yes, I am trying to be a Jew now, but only I can say that. You can't unless you were a Jew. Okay? So I guess in my case, yes, I'm trying to be a good Jew. Because I came from a community where people were pretty lousy Jews. Lousy meaning they weren't keeping anything. Hanging out, doing work on whatever on Saturday, eating whatever they want and all that stuff. I mean, they weren't keeping the commandments. Oh, sure, they would show up for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. They maybe have a couple of Hanukkah candles and have a Seder. It's the equivalent of a Christmas Easter Catholic. Right? Okay? They show up twice a year and then you never see them again, right? Oh, but they're going to be there for Christmas and Easter because they know we'll have to be seen by men. I got my good suit. I got my pretty dress. I'm going to show up. Well, we got Jews like that. They would call them High Holy Day Jews. They show up for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. That's what they call the High Holy Days. And sure, they'll have a Seder. They may take their leavened stuff and stick it in the basement instead of getting rid of it. They just might. You know. They might even fast on Yom Kippur, but it's the same thing. They're not keeping Torah. Okay? They're not actually committed to keeping Torah.
Here's a comment, just to let you know that Rabbi Steve didn't finish the verse. We say Christian church excuses the eating of everything. The church I used to attend, Mark 7:15 was the verse they used.
No, I wasn't using Mark 7 to get to where that whole thing about food, where the argument comes from. I was just showing you that in that chapter, it's about hypocrisy. If you want to get a thorough understanding of my teaching on Mark 7, go to the teaching called Kashrut, What is Food? Or Kashrut in Context. Kashrut in Context, I think is the one. Okay? And then you'll see me go through the whole Mark 7 from that whole point of view, of dealing with the whole food issue. Now, I purposely didn't go past verse 13 because I knew I wasn't going to have enough time if I would have turned it into a second issue. I really only wanted to deal with the issue from Matthew 23, which was dealing with traditions. Okay? So, good question. Kashrut in Context is the teaching, and I will probably be redoing that teaching because it's not on video, so that will be part of the CC101 course. We'll kind of readdress Kashrut and the appointed times and Sabbath. All these things are coming soon. Okay? So we'll redo those teachings. So all of those one-part teachings naturally will now be 5 to 7. And you're thinking, I liked it when it was 1. You know me, that's what you're going to get. So